Welcome to the latest edition of Russia Unmasked from the Center for Russian Studies in Kiev, in which we challenge the propaganda published by the Kremlin against Ukraine and share with you a Ukrainian perspective. My name is Tony Meehan. I'm based in London. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has been going on for more than 1,360 days. So just to remind you about propaganda, the rules for successful propaganda programs or campaigns are to keep the messages simple and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. Russia's propaganda is based on the following key messages. Russia has many enemies. It is always under threat. It is the innocent victim. It must be ready to fight. Russia is always right. Putin is your strong leader. Russia doesn't start wars. It conducts special military operations to defend Mother Russia. Yes, makes sense, doesn't it? This week's edition includes the perfect, the best in Russian propaganda, how to change the agenda, how to disrupt and confuse, how to hijack the global news agenda with two non-news stories, fake news, all in basically 24 hours. In the last week, Putin introduced 2 nuclear weapons and called for the resumption of nuclear testing. In response, the Belgian minister warned Putin to think twice about attacking NATO, otherwise Moscow would be wiped out. The US president told his military to think about nuclear weapons testing. The Russian defense minister called for Russia nuclear testing because of the actions of the United States. Those actions referred to nuclear weapons in Europe and Pacific regions, as though it was a recent development. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, was sidelined from a Russian security meeting, starting a media frenzy of speculation as to his future. And Lavrov to only reappear 2 or 3 days later to state Russia has received no explanation why Trump has called for weapon testing. So the headlines really are: Lavrov excluded from major Russian security meeting, fake news. Russia has received no explanation from the US regarding resumption of nuclear testing, fake news. Ukraine, on the other hand, estimates the war cost to Russia and Russians since the February 2022 to be in the region of $111 billion and still rising. Real news, that is real news. Russian oil exports for the first 10 months of 2025 dropped to 97 billion from 137 billion the year before. That's a 30% drop. So let's start. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was the only permanent member of the Security Council, this is the Russian Security Council, to miss a meeting to discuss the full-scale nuclear testing. In parallel, it emerged that the foreign minister would not be leading the Russian delegation to the G20 summit in Johannesburg. That's later this month, except that Putin had signed a decree appointing a more junior official, I like that term, junior official, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Officer, great titles, Maxim Oroshenkin, to head up the delegation. As I said previously, this led to media speculation as to the future of the foreign minister. However, days later, he reappeared and led the story against the US, questioning its decision to conduct nuclear testing. They asked the question, why are we not informed about this? The reason is because you started it. This statement is probably for a Russian audience. Russia has received no explanation from the US regarding the resumption of nuclear testing, says Lavrov. He conveniently forgets, for his international audience that is, the fact that Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belosov, during a previous meeting with Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin and members of the Security Council, as quoted by the Russian media in days in advance. So this is in Moscow Times, Moscow News, and wherever, TASS, what have you, said that Russia needs to prepare for a full-scale nuclear test in response to the actions of the United States. I had to thank Mr. Lavrov for the perfect example of multiple levels of Russian propaganda. using subterfuge, changing the agenda to distract the attention and thinking of your enemy, declare your innocence, although you've already committed the crime or the offence, if you like, and through claimed ignorance accuse your enemy of abuse that you've already committed. Then what you do is you sit back and you wait for a response. And when you get a response you wanted, you create and state a new reality of escalation and of a threat for war. That is exactly what has happened in the last 7 days. In case you missed the original story, Russian Defense Minister Medvedev claimed that the US is planning to deploy missiles in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region with a flight time from Germany to central Russia of 67 minutes. Moscow must maintain its nuclear potential and respond appropriately to Washington's moves. He added that a possible US withdrawal from the moratorium on nuclear testing could become a step towards the destruction of the system of global strategic stability. Isn't that grand? Isn't it pompous? Isn't it arrogant? And it's also totally incorrect. The reality check is that NATO, Europe, United States including, have had defensive nuclear weapons for more than 70 years. And they have been in Europe. And they have been, if not based in Hawaii, which is a state of America the last time I looked, they most certainly will be found on the submarines and other vessels floating the Pacific. So that's that. Not only that, let's not forget that China, North Korea have had nuclear weapons in the Pacific region for the best part of 60 years. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has since stated that Moscow has not yet received clarification since President Donald Trump mentioned the United States will be resuming nuclear testing. Does he not understand that this is actually Trump in response to Putin? Or maybe that's too simple for them said. Moscow so far has received no explanations through diplomatic channels from the United States about what Trump meant when he mentioned the resumption of nuclear testing. What a shame. It is unclear, I quote, whether he was referring to the tests of nuclear weapon carriers, so-called subcritical tests, or whether Donald Trump actually meant Washington intends to resume full-scale nuclear testing. Let's have a reality check. President Trump responded to Putin's announcement introducing 2 nuclear weapons and Medvedev's call for nuclear testing, instructing the US to get ready to test, following which Russia claimed surprise at the US decision and changing the agenda, creating confusion with Lavrov's apparent demotion. Remember, everything is planned with an objective, which is never obvious and only realized after it has been achieved. So we have to realize that Russia is the professional propaganda partner in this whole program. Ask yourself this question. Do you really believe Lavrov was purposefully excluded from a meeting with Putin and Russia's Security Council? Or was it just another piece of propaganda to confuse and start foreign government and media speculation? I know I did. I speculated. I wonder if he's on his way out. But clearly he's not. 2 days later, Lavrov is leading both the global domestic conversation regarding US motives to resume nuclear testing. The objective was really to set the scene that the reason that why we, Russia, Mother Russia, have to be ready and prepared for a nuclear war is because the United States has got nuclear weapons in Europe, which it's had for 70 plus years. Moving on, another form of propaganda which Russia is very expert at is propaganda by omission. There are different forms of propaganda. There is the total blatant lie. There is the half-truth based on a semi-established or historic fact, such as we've just discussed. Then there is the propaganda through omission. When it comes to keeping his own citizens misinformed, Vladimir Putin is the master deceiver. This week, we want to share with you information from the Office of Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine that estimates that the cost to Russia of Putin's invasion in February 22 to be in excess of $111 billion. Imagine the billions of US dollars in the form of Russian scrap metal left in the fields across Ukraine. We're not talking about small arms such as rifles, machine guns, pistols, but heavy-duty fighting equipment. 11,300 tanks, 775 fighter transport aircraft, helicopters, 4,000 cruise missiles. Those are estimated at $250,000 each, so therefore you're talking about $1 billion spent on cruise missiles, some of which, yes, were successful and hit their targets, most of which did not. 28 naval vessels, including the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet and submarines, etc., etc. 67,000 other vehicles, troop carriers, jeeps, other stuff. 34,000 artillery systems, and the list goes on and on. More than 250,000 of high-price items, and of course we cannot forget the 1.1 million military servicemen killed or wounded. Imagine the cost of that is really quite excessive. Putin committed, the Kremlin committed, 28,000 per soldier's family killed. So if your soldier member was killed, husband, son, whatever, you were to receive $28,000. That's 12 billion, based on an estimate of 600,000, which is roughly half of what has been damaged and killed. We cannot forget hidden costs, so just allocate 10 billion to that. So you're talking somewhere between 130 and 140 billion in total in less than 4 years. If you recall an earlier figure I mentioned, that was 137 billion, which is down to 97 billion. That's a 40 billion loss in revenue from oil revenues. That doesn't include Yes, it doesn't include the cost of extraction and exporting and everything else. I mean, so that is the gross figure, not the net profit figure. So the importance of foreign income from oil and gas cannot be ignored because it no longer exists. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please share this with your friends and anybody else you think would be interested. And we will be in touch with more news shortly. Until then, Slava Ukraini. Ukrainians were, are, and always will be here. Volodymyr Zelensky. Thank you now. Bye-bye.